Okay, now we understand how we're getting GDP, but what we actually did is we calculated what's called nominal GDP, or GDP for a particular year. Now the thing of it is we want to go ahead and be able to compare these from year to year to year. We want to see what this does every year. So we want to take a look at if it's growing, shrinking, or staying the same. So we did the nominal GDP, and the problem is if we do nominal GDP for 2018, it's hard to go ahead and compare it to 2019 because things have changed. Basically, prices have changed, inflation. So what we need to do is we need to do something called calculating real GDP. So grab out this worksheet, and what we're going to do is we're going to see how we go ahead and look at focusing so that we can compare everything year to year. So we're comparing apples to apples instead of apples to oranges. Okay, so nominal GDP, total market value of all final goods and services produced in the United States within the year. Real GDP is nominal GDP adjusted for inflation or deflation over time. So in other words, prices increase, prices decrease, because that happens all the time. I mean, hell, let's face it now, gasoline's at what, $1.85 a gallon, and some places a lot lower. And just 2 weeks ago, it was like $2.40 a gallon. So we need to take a look at what inflation does. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use examples. Now I calculated these in 2008 and 2012. And instead of everything, the millions and millions and millions of products that we produce, we're only going to look at one. So we're going to look at the output. So this is the production of the economy in this particular area. And we're going to look at gallons of gasoline. And here's how many gallons that were produced. Now remember, this is an example. Also, the price of the gallons of gas. Now these prices were identified on April 1st in these years. Yes, I couldn't resist. It's April Fool's Day. That was the average gallon of gas for those years. So we're going to pretend that this is the things that were produced, and this is the price of everything that was produced. So we go ahead and we calculate nominal GDP. We add up the prices of everything that was produced. So in this case, we did 5 gallons of gasoline at $3.34 a gallon, and it comes up to $16.70. 7 gallons, $2.06, $14.42, and if you do the rest of the math, it comes up to $22.72, $36.80, and $43.12. Now this is what we did in the last section. We calculated nominal GDP. But the problem is, if we looked at 2008 and 2009, we'd go, oh my God, the economy is shrinking. And then the government goes, we got to do something. Remember, we don't want government involved. We want the invisible hand to play out most of the time. So what we need to do is we need to pick one year, and we're going to pick 2008, and we are going to convert all of the other prices to 2008 prices so we can actually compare what's really going on in our GDP. So the first thing we need to do is obviously come up with the nominal GDPs for those years, but then the second is we have to do what's called a price index. It's another formula. And we go ahead and put these together. So let's take this one, and we're going to do 2008 and 2009. So 2008, the price index, it says the current year price divided by the base year, stick a Y in there, price, and times that by 100. So let's take a look at 2008. Now 2008 is the base year. We're going to compare everything to 2008. All right. So current year price in 2008 is $3.34. So we got $3.34. The base year price, well, the base year is 2008. We have $3.34. $3.34 divided by $3.34, we get 1. Okay, multiplied by 100, we get 100. So there we are. That's what we've got. Oops. That equaled 100 times the 100 So our price index for 2008 is 100. Now let's take a look at 2009. All right? Current year price in 2009, 206. Ooh. Base year price, not 209 or 206. We go back to 2008 because that's the year we're comparing all these to. So that gives us 334. Now we do the math on that one. Grab out my little calculator here. And we got 2.06 divided by 3.34. And boom, we get 0.61. 0.61. Now times that by 100. And we have a price index in 2009 of 61. Now you're going to have to do a couple of these, so you may want to make sure that you've got this. If you do the math for the rest of them, it should come out to 8502, 11017, and 11736. Now this by itself means absolutely nothing. This is just the conversion factor that we're going to use in the next formula. So our next formula, this is how we calculate real GDP. Let's get rid of this part for a minute. If you missed that, back the tape up. All right. So the formula, nominal GDP divided by price index divided by 100. Now remember, if it's in parentheses, you got to do that first. Okay. So let's take 2008. Nominal GDP for 2008, 1670. The price index for 2008, 100, divided by 100. So 100 divided by 100 is 1. 1670 divided by 1 equals 1670. Now, let's think about this for a minute. We're comparing 2008 to all of these other years. If we're comparing it, and this is 2008, is 2008 going to change? It shouldn't. So that's why a price index of 100 also gives you an idea of what the base year is. So here's our base year. Now let's take 2009. All right, we got the nominal GDP for 2009 is 1442. So there's our 1442 divided by the price index, which is 61. Okay, I'll give it the 6167 times 100. And there's our parentheses. So we do the math, and we have, oops, divided by 100, my bad. Okay, divided by 100, so we have 1442 over 0.6167. And we do the math on that real quick. Let's see, 14.42 divided by 0.6167 equals 2338. Okay, and I'm going to hit this thing over here. If I did the math right, it should say the same thing. Yep, 2338. I'm doing good. And then if we do the math for the other three, it comes out 2663, 3340, 3674. Now here's the thing. From here to here, it looked like the economy went down. And from here to here, and from here to here, look, the economy just grew all over the place. Because an economy growing too fast can bring on inflation. That can be another problem. That's why we can't compare nominal GDP, because price levels changed. When we go ahead and compare it, when we do the computation and compare everything else down to 1 year, we look at, hey, it grew, it grew, it grew, it grew, and it didn't grow too fast. As a matter of fact, from here to here, it grew the fastest. If you just relied on this, and you said, oh my God, I got to increase the economy. Think about, you're driving a sports car on a windy road with a cliff on this side going 800 feet down. Right? And you're just driving along, nice and comfort and everything else, and all of a sudden, oh my God, I got to speed up. In the meantime, you're already going this fast. Okay? This is the fastest that this whole part of the GDP grew. You're going this fast. You think you're going this slow. You hit that accelerator and you come to the next curve and all of a sudden, right off the cliff. That's what could happen to our economy. So that's why you can't use nominal GDP. You have to use the price index to convert it to real GDP. So now we can compare this year to this year and this year and this year and so forth. That's what we're looking to do. That's the only real calculation that has to happen. Do you ever need to calculate it? Other than this class, probably not. Why? Google GDP for 2008, Google GDP for 2009, and you get them. So you really don't have to do all of this work because you can get a lot of stuff off the internet. But this gives you the reasons why we do it this way. And the whys will come in a little bit more important, especially if you're going to go into a business degree, microeconomics, and that kind of stuff. So we did that part. If you don't have any questions, you'll have this for homework. So take a look at that in the homework file in the module. And grab out this sheet, because right now we filled out this much of it, okay? Now we're going to go and take a look and fill out the rest of this stuff here, okay? Now, our economy, there are 4 bad things and 1 good thing that could happen, okay? The first bad thing is it could be shrinking, okay? That is really bad. Also, it could be staying the same or barely shrinking. That's bad. It could be growing some, but not really a whole lot, which is a warning that it may go back this way. So these 3, bad. Growing enough. In other words, we have a nice growth, that the economy is growing. That number 5 goal of stability of the economy, that's what we want. This is great. But if we grow too fast, we're going to go ahead and bump into inflation. And inflation means our dollars don't buy as much anymore. Which means if you're used to buying $1,000 worth of stuff, throw in inflation, all of a sudden next month you're only buying $950 worth of stuff with the same $1,000. So your standard of living basically fell 50 bucks. And the only thing that happened is inflation did. So we don't want it to grow too fast either. We get into the aggregate demand chapter, you'll see a lot more about how this works. So throw that over on your sheet. And there are some things that GDP does not measure. The first is it doesn't measure stuff that is produced but not sold through a market. Right? This would be like barter. Homemakers, wives or husbands, stay at home. And what do? They do housework, they do yard work, they do plumbing, they do electrical work, but they don't get paid for it. That's not part of GDP. Do it yourself doesn't have anything to do with GDP. You decide you're going to put your own fence up, doesn't count. And barter. You make good shoes, your neighbor makes good bread, one makes the other, and both of you are happy. Doesn't count because there was not an exchange of dollars. It wasn't sold through the market. The second is leisure. How can you put a price on leisure? I might say that going boating isn't exactly the prime thing I want to do. I spent 20 years on a submarine. I don't want to be on a sailboat and get seasick and throw up. Other people go, hey, the sea is great and I'd spend a lot of money doing this. So leisure is something that we all can't figure out what a common price is, so we just don't count it. Also, population. Now we'll get more into this concept called per capita GDP later. But if we have a $2 trillion economy, we could be really good or not so good, depending on how many people we have. Because per capita GDP, we divide that 2 trillion by $100 million, or 100 million people, and we've got pretty good growing economy. But then you divide it by 5 times that amount, and the money left over per person is about this much. So at the 1 million, you've got this much money per person spending in that economy, generally speaking. When you got 500 million, you got this much. So the people aren't as wealthy as they are, and their standard of living is 5 times less. So we don't count population. We also don't count externalities. Remember, that was the, let's see, what I call it, the spillovers, the spillover cost and spillover benefit. We don't count those. So if you have a negative thing, a health problem, we don't count it. If you got a positive thing, like the injections, we don't count. Also, we don't count illegal activities. Why? They're illegal. Try going up to the local drug lord on an official government piece of paper and go, excuse me, could you tell me how much drugs that you went ahead and produced last year and sign here? Right? Doesn't happen. So that's part of the underground economy that we don't count. Okay? Now, by the way, the underground economy is estimated to be 7 to 12% more than the economy that's reported. So right now, our economy is a little bit below our debt. But if you count the underground economy, the GDP is still higher than our debt, which is a good thing. And again, how do you go ahead and figure it out? Now, they estimate between 7 to 12%, and if you take a look at the 2017 GDP, which is 1936 trillion, that means we could have more 1.35 up to 2.3 trillion more dollars than what we're reporting. So this could actually be 2168 instead of 1936 trillion dollars. So we're looking at $2 trillion more than is actually reported. All right, we also don't count financial non-production transactions. Now this is one of the last confusing things in this chapter. Because, okay, non-production transactions, public transfer payments. We don't count Social Security, welfare, and that kind of stuff because it's not for current production, remember? These are transfer payments, future or past production, so we don't count them. We also don't go ahead and count private transfer payments. Son comes home from college. I'm sure he's going to ask me again, hey, can I have some bucks? He didn't make them, I did, but we don't count the transfer payment. Now, we do go ahead and count payments for services provided. Now, here's the key thing. If we're going to buy stock, right, the stock itself, we just transfer paper to paper. We're transferring this paper to this guy, and this guy's taking his paper money and transferring it to here. That's just a transfer of paper. There was no production there. What was produced was the service that was done by the brokers. Because when you want to buy a stock, you put in a buy order, and they go ahead and make the transaction for a fee. I mean, that's how they make their money. So they send it over here, and then this guy is making a a sell transaction. So he sends the money, they take another fee, and it goes to this person. So the transfer of the stock and the money don't count, but the service that the brokers provided, that is what counts, because that was an actual production. That was a service that was done to make this happen. And secondhand sales. If you already bought the car, when you sell it used, you can't count it again. So this is what we're looking at. Now, how do we, why do we care about GDP? Remember this part here? Economic growth. This lets us know if we're meeting that third common goal. All right, now in your book, a lot of people go ahead and say, I don't understand this. I do want you to go ahead and understand part of it. So let me break it down real simple. First off, if we take all the lines off, guess what? We have GDP, equals household spending, business spending, government spending, and the foreign market or the rest of the world spending. Hey, GDP equals those things. There's our formula. Now, gross domestic product is all of these together. Now, what happens is it breaks it down and then it builds it back up. The first thing happens is when we spend replacement capital, in other words, we want to stay where we are, we take that, subtract it from gross domestic product, and it becomes this national domestic product. Okay? At this point, for this class, I really don't care if you remember that, but that's what happens. It's the replacement capital to keep us where we are that reduces that amount. Then, because remember, we're doing this part. Then what happens is all of the income going to foreign markets, in other words, the rest of the world, the money that goes to them, is taken out and it becomes our national income. So this is the income that's made here in the US that we do stuff with. Now the question is, what do we do with our income? You remember that? Right. We spend it, we save it, and Uncle Sam takes part of it. All right? We pay taxes, we save money, we spend on things. What do our taxes go for? Well, first off, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Protection, right? Military, police, fire, FEMA. Protection of rights under the Constitution, private property, rule of law courts, and the representative government. Elections, peaceful transfer of power, and the vision and drive of where the country is going. That's part of it. And then, of course, there's the safety net. Healthcare, Social Security, jobs, that's always some good things we want to take care of. This is what a lot of our tax money goes to. We don't think about this because unfortunately sometimes our folks in DC with their great imaginations spend $5 million and build a turtle tunnel under I-10. Okay? How that works with us, no clue. Now, once we take the business taxes out, this national income becomes personal income, or in other words, what the households make. Okay? Now, remember, personal income. This is the stuff I want you to remember. Personal income is taxes, savings, and spending. So remember that part. We take out the personal taxes, and we end up having the money that we can spend. Savings, you know, you could go to the business or government. Remember, savings goes to our capital market. But the money that we have after our paycheck, this one's called personal income, this one's called disposable income. Because we can do whatever we want with our savings and spending. Nobody can tell us what to do and what not to do with it. Right? There's our disposable income. What do? Well, first off, we do savings. Investment goes to the capital market, provides for retirement, education, vacations, wedding, births, all that kind of stuff. And we spend it. Food, clothing, shelter, and other stuff. So I want you to remember the concept of personal income, all three of these, and disposable income, these two, because we'll get into it when we talk about fiscal policy. Now, of course, that disposable income, we buy services and durable and non-durable goods. Right? Now, what's the difference? Well, a durable good is something you can touch. Right? This thing right here, durable good, I can touch it. We spend about 10.8% of all of our income on durable goods. Okay? Things we can touch. Now, what decides a durable good and a non-durable good? How long we have it for. 3 years. If it's 3 years or more, it's a durable good. If it's less, it's durable good, yep. If it's less, it's a non-durable good. The IRS decided that, and that's what we use. Now, non-durable good, milk and clothes would probably be the whole thing. And then a service. This is intangible. In other words, you can't touch it. It's just you know it happened. Education. Are you actually learning? Because that's a service. Car service. You drop the car in for an oil change, you come and you pick it up later. Do you know if they really changed your oil or your oil filter? You're trusting the service that they provided. All right. We are called a service economy. And why? Because 86 or 68% of our spending is on service stuff. The other 32% is spent on goods. So that's why we're called a service economy. It's just because we spend more on services. So we now have this, and guess what happens? We're spending money. Well, there's that C, there's our consumption spending going into gross domestic product. Oh, there's IG, there's our business spending going to gross domestic product. Oh, there's our G, there's our government spending going to gross domestic product. And there's the net exports, our XN, going to gross domestic product. So really, you could look at it as it was another way to look at our circular flow diagram, our expenditures formula, and how it works. Now I want you to remember GDP are these four things, so there's your circular flow diagram. And I want you to remember personal income are these three, and disposable income are these two. And we'll get into that later as to why. So, your circular flow diagram should look like this. Your other sheet should look like this. And we explained what that was. Now, you have a paper. It's called the circle paper. Take a look in the folder in Canvas. And it is an article. It's in the textbook. It's the last word article in the basic macroeconomics relationship in the textbook. Basic macro relationships, that's a chapter. So don't read the chapter, but I want you to do is go to the last word segment there. Read the article and respond to the questions that are down here. Use the 4-bullet paragraph format. Remember, section 1, 8 key facts. Now this one's a little different because there's 8 people. So for each of these 8, you want to go ahead and put the person's name. Then under the person's name, what's their business? What happened to their business? Why did it happen? So you're going to have 8 of those 3 things there. You're going to have the name and business, what happened and why did it happen. Then the Article 2 questions. What happened in the end? And then I want you to go ahead and take and explain the concept of incentive, supply and demand, capitalism, and the production possibilities model in bullet paragraph form. Now this should be 2E. So I'm looking for 2A, B, C, D, and E. And then the circular flow model, I want you to take a look at that and explain why what happened that way. So that'll be 2F. Then of course my 2 questions, what did you learn? What was specifically important to you? Remember, this is the, what was aha when you were doing all of this, okay? And that ends this segment.